The whisper didn't begin with panic. It began with hesitation. A pause that lasted just a fraction too long, in a place where hesitation did not exist. They saw it. The words passed quietly between two delegates in the outer corridor of the council spire, carried not by sound alone, but by subtle shifts in posture, flickers of bioluminescent skin, and the faint tightening of sensory tendrils. They saw what? A delay. Another pause. And then, the human. That was all it took. Across the vast, layered halls of the Galactic Council, something invisible began to spread. Not information. Not yet. Something older. Something instinctive. Unease. The Council Spire had stood for over 9,000 standard cycles, orbiting a dead star as a monument to unity, diplomacy, and control. Within its walls, wars had been prevented before they began. Entire civilizations had been judged, sanctioned, or erased, not through violence, but through decision. Order lived here. Predictability lived here. Nothing unexpected happened here. Until now. At first, the reports were dismissed. A minor incident, they said. A localized misunderstanding. The kind of thing that happened when a newly integrated species failed to fully grasp interstellar protocol. And humanity felt new. Humanity was still new. Still being evaluated. They're emotional. That had been the consensus. Unstable in trivial matters, but harmless in meaningful ones. A species driven by fleeting impulses, anger, compassion, curiosity, all flaring brightly, then fading just as quickly. Unreliable. Dangerous? That distinction had been agreed upon unanimously. Recorded. Final. But now, that certainty was beginning to fracture. They said it wasn't gradual. The whisper resurfaced again, this time deeper within the spire, closer to the central chambers where the highest-ranking delegates resided. It wasn't escalation. There was no transition phase. What does that mean? Another pause. Longer this time. As if the one speaking was choosing their words with surgical precision. It means it was instant. A low-frequency hum began to ripple through the lower levels of the station, barely perceptible to most species, but enough to trigger ancient survival responses in those whose evolution had not entirely erased them. Several delegates stopped mid-movement. Others withdrew from conversations without explanation. One species, avian, sharp-eyed, and notoriously composed, abruptly folded its wings tight against its body, a defensive posture not seen in over 3 centuries. No alarms were triggered. No announcements were made. And yet, something was wrong. They've requested an emergency assembly. That message spread faster than the others. Not because it was louder, but because it was official. An emergency assembly required a threshold, an event significant enough to demand the attention of every senior representative across dozens of systems. It meant risk, instability, potential conflict. But more than that, it meant uncertainty. Who called it? The inner council. For what reason? Another pause. And then quietly, they didn't specify. That had never happened before. Not once in recorded history. As the corridors began to fill, delegates moved with unusual urgency. Not panic. Never panic, but something dangerously close to it. Eyes met and quickly looked away. Signals were exchanged in private frequencies. Questions were asked. None were answered. And through it all, one detail kept resurfacing. Distorted. Repeated. Unconfirmed. But impossible to ignore. The human didn't hesitate. They didn't react. They didn't even speak. They just changed. No one could explain what that meant. Not yet. But the way it was said, the way even the most ancient species hesitated before repeating it, turned the words into something heavier. Something wrong. By the time the central chamber doors began to open, the atmosphere inside the council spire had shifted completely. Not into chaos, but into something far more dangerous. Expectation. Because whatever had happened, whatever the whispers were trying, and failing, to describe, every instinct shared across thousands of species was converging on the same conclusion. Something had been revealed. Something that was never meant to be seen. And at the center of it all, was a human. By the time the inner chamber began to fill, the whispers had evolved. Not into clarity, but into contradiction. They're exaggerating. That was the first official stance. Logical. Reassuring. Spoken by a senior delegate whose species had mediated conflicts long before most civilizations in the Council had achieved spaceflight. A newly inducted species fails to regulate its behavior during a high-stress interaction. This is not unprecedented. A ripple of agreement followed. Measured. Controlled. Comforting. Yes, humans are known for irregular emotional spikes. Another voice joined in, smooth, analytical. They experience heightened adrenaline responses. Temporary aggression is expected under threat conditions. Expected, a third confirmed. Contained, a fourth added. The narrative began to stabilize. The unknown was being reshaped into something familiar. Something manageable. At the far edge of the chamber, a crystalline entity pulsed faintly, projecting archived data into the shared space between delegates. Species, human. Origin, death world classification, moderate. The pause. Correction, another delegate interjected. Reclassified as borderline death world due to environmental volatility. Noted. The projection shifted. Images flickered into existence. Storms tearing across oceans. Predators with forward-facing eyes. Creatures hunting in coordinated packs. Gravity stronger than standard. Atmosphere denser. Such environments produce resilience, one delegate observed. Not dominance. More agreement. Subtle this time. But present. Humans survived their world, another voice added, but survival does not equate to superiority. Many species endure harsh conditions without exhibiting instability. A faint tightening of the chamber followed that word. Instability. It lingered longer than it should have. Let us remain precise, a senior counselor stated. Humans are adaptable, resourceful, socially complex. A brief pause. Then, deliberately, but not exceptional in any singular domain. That had been the official assessment. Filed. Accepted. Unchallenged. They are physically inferior to multiple council species. Technologically behind the leading civilizations. Emotionally inconsistent. And yet, a quieter voice said from the mid-tier rows, they advanced faster than projected. That slowed things down. Only slightly, but enough. Expansion rate exceeded expectations. Conflict resolution patterns unpredictable. Alliance formation unusually effective. The data did not fit perfectly, but it didn't alarm anyone either. Not yet. Humans rely on cooperation, someone concluded. Pack behavior, another clarified. Just collective strength, not individual threat. That idea settled quickly. It was comfortable. It made sense. Then this incident, whatever it was, is likely an anomaly. Agreed. A single human reacting outside baseline parameters. Containable. Explainable. Forgettable. That word echoed longer than expected. Not because it was loud, but because no one immediately reinforced it. At the center of the chamber, where the highest-ranking members of the council would soon take position, a space remained deliberately open. Reserved. Waiting. For the human representative. They are already present, a voice noted quietly. Several heads turned. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But enough. Near the lower tier of the central platform, seated alone among species that rarely chose isolation, was the human. No movement. No visible reaction to the shifting atmosphere. No attempt to engage. Just stillness. They appear calm, one delegate observed. Of course they do, another replied. Emotional suppression after an outburst is typical in their species. A few signals of agreement followed. They burn quickly, then fade. That explanation passed easily between them. Too easily. Because none of them noticed the detail that mattered. The human wasn't calming down. They had already been calm. Long before the whispers began. Long before the chamber filled. Long before the council even realized something was wrong. And whatever had happened, whatever the word changed truly meant, it hadn't left them. The doors to the central chamber did not open quickly. They never did. Constructed from layered alloys harvested from collapsed stars, the twin gates responded only to unified authorization from the inner council. Their movement was deliberate, measured, not for dramatic effect, but as a reminder. Nothing entered this space without consequence. A low, resonant vibration spread through the chamber as the seals disengaged. Conversations stopped instantly. Not faded. Not trailed off. Stopped. One by one, the inner council entered. They did not speak. They did not acknowledge the gathered delegates. And yet their presence alone shifted the atmosphere from uneasy to heavy. At the forefront moved a towering, many-limbed entity, its form constantly adjusting, as though reality itself struggled to define its edges. It had witnessed the collapse of empires before most species present had discovered fire. Behind it, a trio of synchronized beings advanced in perfect unison, their shared consciousness projecting a silent field of analysis that pressed against every mind in the chamber. Others followed, each one older, slower, more dangerous than anything seated below. These were not politicians. They were survivors. And they looked unsettled. That detail did not go unnoticed. They've already reviewed the incident, a delegate whispered through a private channel. Then why call a full assembly? No preliminary statement, no summary, nothing? Silence answered that question. At the center of the chamber, the elevated platform activated, responding to the presence of the inner council. Rings of dim light formed beneath them, aligning positions according to rank, influence, and, more subtly, threat assessment. The human's position did not change. Still seated. Still silent. Still separate. Why are they isolated? That wasn't ordered, another voice responded. Then it's voluntary? No one answered. Because isolation in this chamber was never casual. It was instinct. The lights dimmed slightly. Not enough to obscure. Just enough to focus attention. A signal pulsed outward from the central platform. The session had begun. Report. The voice that spoke was not loud. It didn't need to be. It carried weight the way gravity carried mass, inevitable and impossible to ignore. A secondary platform rose from the lower tier. Upon it stood the witness. An insectoid species, tall, segmented, its outer shell marked with faint stress fractures along the thoracic plates. That alone was unusual. Its kind did not fracture easily. You were present at the incident, the inner council voice continued. Confirm. The insectoid inclined its upper body. Confirmed. Then begin. A pause followed. Not procedural. Not respectful. Hesitant. The witness started, then stopped. Its mandibles shifted slightly, producing a faint, involuntary clicking sound. An unconscious response rarely displayed in formal settings. I will require clarification parameters. A ripple moved through the chamber. Clarify. What precisely is the council requesting I describe? Another pause. This one longer. Heavier. The event, the inner council replied. The insectoid did not respond immediately. Its posture tightened. Not in defiance. Not in confusion. In restraint. With respect, it said carefully, the sequence of actions can be described. A slight shift. A hesitation. But that is not the same as explaining what occurred. That landed. Across the chamber, attention sharpened. Multiple species began recording at higher resolution. Others leaned forward, physically or cognitively, subtly abandoning their earlier dismissiveness. Explain the distinction, the council ordered. Another pause. Shorter this time. But more dangerous. The human, the witness said slowly, did not escalate. A flicker of confusion spread. They did not respond to stimuli in any measurable progression. That contradicts earlier assumptions, a delegate interjected. Yes, the insectoid replied. Those assumptions are incorrect. The chamber stilled. The human was stable, it continued. No elevated stress indicators. No aggression markers. No visible emotional deviation. Then the incident was triggered externally. No. That single word hit harder than anything spoken so far. No, the council repeated. The insectoid's limbs tightened. Microfractures along its shell spread slightly wider. No trigger was observed. Silence. Complete. Absolute. Clarify your statement, the inner council said. And this time, there was no hesitation. The human did not react to the situation. The pause. They reacted to something else. Across the chamber, a subtle shift occurred. Not movement. Not sound. Recognition. Because for the first time since the whispers began, something about this didn't feel like a misunderstanding. Or an anomaly. It felt like a gap. A missing piece. And at the center of that gap, still unmoving, still silent, the human finally lifted their head. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But just enough. For several ancient species, beings who had endured extinction-level wars, to experience something they had not felt in centuries. Instinctive fear. The chamber did not move. It held. Every eye, every sensor, every layer of perception, locked onto the witness. Display the record. The command came from the inner council. No debate. No delay. The insectoid hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. But this time, everyone saw it. As requested. The chamber darkened. Not completely. Just enough for the projection to take control of the space. The recording began. At first, nothing seemed unusual. A standard diplomatic corridor aboard an outer ring station. Neutral territory. Low threat designation. Multiple species present, moving along predefined routes, engaged in routine interactions. Orderly. Predictable. The timestamp corresponds to 14 cycles prior, the witness narrated. The human was assigned as an auxiliary observer. Non-combat role. No authority. The human appeared in frame. Walking. Not armored. Not guarded. No visible indication of status or threat. Biometric readings? A delegate asked. Stable. The insectoid replied immediately. Heart rate within normal variance. No stress indicators. No chemical elevation associated with aggression. The human continued forward. Unremarkable. Almost forgettable. That's it, someone muttered. This is the incident? Wait, another voice said. Because something had changed. Not in the human. In the environment. At the far end of the corridor, movement. Sharp, sudden, out of sync with the surrounding flow. 3 figures entered the frame. Unknown species. Unregistered. Their motion wasn't just fast. It was intentional. They breached the perimeter without clearance. The witness continued. Security response delay, 2.7 seconds. One of the figures extended a limb. A weapon unfolded. Energy-based. Combat. Lethal. The first discharge hit before most in the corridor even understood what they were seeing. A delegate, unarmed, collapsed instantly. Chaos followed. Not loud. Not immediate. But spreading. Like a fracture racing through glass. Beings scattered. Signals flared. Some froze. Others ran. Standard crisis response. Predictable. The human, the council voice pressed. Still stable. The projection shifted focus. The human had stopped walking. That was all. No defensive posture. No attempt to flee. No visible reaction to the first casualty. They are in direct proximity to the attackers, a delegate noted. Why are they not moving? Because, the insectoid said quietly, they had already seen them. That drew attention. Immediate. Clarify. The human's visual focus shifted 0.4 seconds before the attackers entered the visible frame. Silence. That's not possible, someone said. No, another corrected. It's not supposed to be possible. The recording continued. A second shot fired. Closer this time. Closer to the human. Still no reaction. They are within lethal range, a voice said, now edged with something unfamiliar. Why are they not responding? Because everything about the scene suggested they should be. Panic. Instinct. But the human? did none of those things. Instead, they turned. Not toward the nearest exit. Not toward cover. Toward the attackers. Slowly. Deliberately. And for the first time since the recording began, the chamber noticed something subtle. Something almost invisible. The human's posture had changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for most species to register immediately. But enough. Their shoulders lowered. Their center of gravity shifted. Their movement simplified. They're preparing to run, one delegate guessed. No, the insectoid said. The pause. They're not preparing to escape. Another shot fired. Closer, closer. So, no panic. No hesitation. No escalation. The human took a single step forward. That was the moment. Not when the weapons fired. Not when the first life was lost. But that step. Because everything, every predictive model, every behavioral expectation, every assumption the council had ever recorded about humanity, broke. Right there. Pause the recording. The projection froze. The human stood mid-step. Attackers advancing. Energy weapons active. Chaos unfolding around them. And yet, the focus of the entire chamber had narrowed to a single, impossible detail. They're walking toward the threat. A low murmur spread. That's not bravery. No, another voice replied, quieter now. That's something else. At the center platform, one of the inner council members leaned forward slightly. A movement so small it would have gone unnoticed under any other circumstances. But not now. Resume. The recording flickered back to life. And across the chamber, without understanding why, dozens of species experienced the same instinct at once. The urge to step back. The recording resumed. The human's foot completed the step. So, measured. Final. Everything else in the corridor moved faster. Panic escalated. Bodies collided. Voices overlapped in fragmented bursts of fear. But the human moved once. And then stopped. The attackers advanced. Their formation tightened, weapons adjusting with mechanical precision as they tracked targets through the chaos. Distance to human? A delegate asked. 4.2 meters, the insectoid replied. Within immediate lethality range. Yes. Another shot discharged. Close enough this time that the energy distortion warped the air near the human's shoulder. So, no reaction. That's not possible, someone whispered. Even suppressed fear responses would trigger evasive motion. They're not suppressing anything, another voice said quietly. They're choosing. That word settled heavily. Because choice implied control. And control implied awareness. The human took another step. Not faster. Not aggressive. Just forward. They are advancing into an active kill zone, a delegate said, unable to keep the disbelief from their tone. Why? No one answered. Because no one had a framework for what they were seeing. The attackers noticed. Their movement shifted. Targets recalculated. For the first time, the human became the focus. A weapon adjusted. But impact imminent, the insectoid stated. And then, the human spoke. Not loudly. Not urgently. Quietly. Calmly. Stop. The word barely registered on most auditory scales. But the effect was immediate. Not on the attackers. On the chamber. Every delegate, every observer, every layered consciousness present. Because something about the way it was said didn't match the situation. There was no fear in it. No strain. No escalation. Just certainty. The attackers did not stop. Of course they didn't. Another shot fired. Closer. Closer. Command ignored, a delegate muttered. It wasn't a command, the insectoid said. The pause. It was a warning. That changed everything. Because warnings implied consequences. And nothing about the human suggested they had the capacity to enforce one. Then this is posturing, another voice insisted quickly. A behavioral bluff. A delay tactic. Yes, someone agreed. It has to be. But even as the explanation formed, it felt weaker than the silence surrounding it. Because the human didn't repeat themselves. Didn't raise their voice. Didn't prepare to defend. They simply stood there. Watching. Not the weapons. Not the chaos. The attackers. Directly. Unblinking. Why are they not moving? Someone asked again. This time, no one tried to answer. The attackers closed the distance. 3 meters. Weapons fully aligned now. Energy signatures spiking in preparation for synchronized discharge. Multiple impacts imminent, the insectoid reported. Still, the human did nothing. No stance. No guard. No visible preparation. Just stillness. And then, something shifted. Not in the corridor. Not in the attackers. In the human. So small, it almost went unnoticed. A breath. Slow. Controlled. And then. And with it, everything changed. The posture. The presence. The space around them. Subtle. But absolute. They just, a delegate started. But the words didn't finish. Because every instinct in the chamber, ancient, buried, shared across species that had never even evolved on the same worlds, activated at once. Danger. Not potential. Not theoretical. Immediate. Pause the recording. No. The response came from the inner council. Final. Let it continue. The attackers fired. And in that exact moment, the last chance to stop what was coming disappeared. The weapons fired. Light tore through the corridor. Compressed energy, designed to end biological life instantly, crossed the distance between attacker and target in less than a blink. And the human moved. Not fast. Not in the way the council understood speed. There was no visible burst of motion. No dramatic evasion. No wasted energy. One moment, they were there. And the next, they weren't. A flicker. That was all the recording captured. A distortion. A misalignment between frames. Playback integrity check, a delegate demanded. Confirmed, the insectoid replied immediately. No data loss. No corruption. That's impossible. Yes. The word settled like a weight. Yes, it is. The recording slowed. Frame by frame. The chamber leaned in, not physically but cognitively, processing at higher levels, drawing on centuries of pattern recognition and combat analysis. The first shot passed through empty space. Not because the human jumped. Not because they dove. Because they had already moved before the trigger completed. They predicted the discharge, someone said. No, another voice corrected, quieter now. They didn't predict it. The pause. They knew. The second shot fired. This time, the human didn't avoid it. They stepped into it. A collective shock rippled through the chamber. The energy blast should have made contact. Should have burned through tissue, disrupted structure, ended function. Instead, the human's hand moved. Not fast. Precise. 2 fingers. That was all. The energy field distorted. Collapsed. Redirected. Not absorbed. Not deflected. Controlled. That's not, a delegate began. But there were no words to finish it. Because no known species interacted with weaponized energy like that. No biology supported it. No technology explained it. And yet, the human didn't hesitate. Didn't react. Didn't even look at what they had just done. Their focus never left the attackers. They're not thinking, someone whispered. No, the insectoid said. The pause. They've already finished thinking. The third shot never fired. Because the attacker holding the weapon was no longer standing. No clear movement preceded it. One frame, intact. Next frame, collapsed. Structure compromised at multiple points. Not torn. Not crushed. Separated. Cleanly. They closed the distance, a delegate said, voice tightening. How? The recording replayed the sequence. Again. And again. Each time revealing the same thing. There was no visible transition. No approach. No acceleration. Just absence. And then presence. They're bypassing reaction time, another voice said. No, came the quiet correction again. They're operating outside of it. The remaining attackers adjusted. Faster now. Less controlled. Fear had entered their movements. For the first time, they hesitated. And that was their mistake. Because the human didn't. Not even for a fraction of a second. No anger. No expression. No sound. Just action. Efficient. Direct. Final. One attacker attempted to retreat. They didn't make it a full step. Another tried to fire blindly. The weapon never discharged. Because the hand holding it was no longer connected. Across the chamber, something unprecedented occurred. Multiple delegates disengaged their higher cognitive functions. Not by choice. By instinct. Because what they were witnessing did not fit into understanding. It bypassed analysis. And went somewhere deeper. Somewhere older. They're not fighting, a voice said, barely audible now. The insectoid didn't respond immediately. Its fractured shell reflected the light of the recording in uneven patterns. No. The pause. They're not. Another frame. Another movement. Another impossible action executed without hesitation. And then, they're hunting. That word didn't echo. It sank. Because every species present, no matter how advanced, how evolved, how far removed from their origins, understood it. Not intellectually. Instinctively. At the center of the chamber, the human watching the recording remained perfectly still. No reaction. No acknowledgement. As if what was unfolding wasn't extraordinary, wasn't violent, wasn't even worth noticing. This version of them was normal. And everything the council thought they knew before was the illusion. The recording did not slow down. It couldn't. Because what followed happened too fast for reduction, too precise for interruption. The human moved again. Not with speed. With inevitability. There was no wasted motion. No hesitation. No adjustment. Every action flowed into the next as if the outcome had already been decided, long before the first shot was ever fired. The second attacker turned. Too late. The human was already inside their reach. No wind-up. No visible force. Just contact. And collapse. Not thrown. Not struck. Disabled. Completely. They're targeting structural failure points, a delegate said, voice tightening under the weight of realization. Not randomly, another added. No, the insectoid confirmed. The pause. Perfectly. The third attacker fired blindly. A desperate move. Uncalculated. Driven by something the council had not seen in them before. The blast erupted across the corridor. Uncontrolled. The human didn't evade. They stepped through it. Not around. Not away. Through. For a fraction of a second, the recording fractured under the strain of what it was trying to capture. Light bent. Space distorted. And then, the human emerged on the other side. Untouched. That's not survivable, someone whispered. It is for them, another replied. But even that sounded wrong. Because survival implied endurance. And the human wasn't enduring anything. They weren't being tested. They weren't being pushed. They were operating at full capacity. The final attacker tried to retreat. Instinct had taken over completely now. Their formation was gone. Their coordination shattered. Their objective abandoned. All that remained was escape. They didn't make it 3 steps. The human reached them. No visible transition. One moment distance. Next moment, a hand. A shift. A precise application of force. And the attacker collapsed mid-motion. The corridor fell silent. Not gradually. Instantly. Because there was nothing left to make noise. The chaos had ended. Not resolved. Ended. The recording lingered on the aftermath. Bodies. Scattered. Motionless. Structural damage. Minimal. Collateral impact. Near zero. Efficiency. Absolute. They neutralized all hostiles in under 3 seconds, a delegate said, voice hollow. 3.4. The insectoid corrected. That includes reaction delay from initial contact. Silence. No one responded. Because numbers didn't matter anymore. Nothing about this could be measured in a way that made it less impossible. At the center of the frame, the human stood alone. Breathing steady. Posture relaxed. No signs of exertion. No visible injury. No indication that anything significant had just occurred. They done? Someone asked, uncertain. Yes. The answer came immediately. They have completed their response. Response. That word echoed strangely, because what they had just witnessed didn't feel like a response. It felt like something far more fundamental. Something automatic. Something inevitable. The human looked down briefly at one of the fallen attackers. No anger. No satisfaction. Nothing. They turned and began walking the same way they had before. Measured. Unremarkable. As if the last few seconds had never happened. As if that version of them, the one that moved without hesitation, without emotion, without limitation, wasn't something separate, wasn't something triggered, but something that had always been there, waiting, unseen, until now. The recording ended. Darkness returned to the chamber. And for the first time since the council spire had been built, no one spoke. Because every species present had reached the same conclusion. Not through logic, not through analysis, but through something deeper. Something they had all just been reminded of. At their core, humans were not prey. They never had been. Darkness settled over the chamber. Not complete. Not empty. Heavy. The kind of silence that doesn't come from calm, but from something being understood all at once. No one asked for the recording to resume. No one questioned its validity. No one attempted to reframe what they had seen, because there was nothing left to reinterpret. They eliminated them. The voice was quiet, unsteady, without escalation. That detail lingered, because escalation implied a rise, a progression, a build. But there had been none. No anger, no panic, no warning signs beyond a single word spoken too softly to matter. Until it did. They didn't lose control, another voice said. The pause. They never needed to. Across the chamber, species that had once dismissed humanity as erratic, emotional, inconsistent, now sat in absolute stillness. Reprocessing, reclassifying, re-evaluating everything. That wasn't aggression, a senior delegate said slowly. Several turned toward them. It was selection. That word changed the shape of the conversation. Selection implies intent, another countered. Yes, the first replied. And precision. The chamber shifted again. Because precision meant control. And control meant this was not a reaction. It was a decision. They chose exactly who to eliminate, someone added, reviewing the data stream. Zero collateral damage. No misfires. No unnecessary force. No hesitation, another said. No error. Each observation made it worse. Because each one removed another layer of comfort. Another possibility that this had been chaotic. Unpredictable. Unstable. It wasn't. It had been perfect. That level of execution requires preparation, a delegate insisted. Training. Conditioning. External augmentation, something. No. The response came from the insectoid witness. Immediate. Final. There was no preparation window. The pause. No external signal. Another pause. No command input. The chamber grew colder. Then where did it come from? Someone asked. No one rushed to answer. Because they already knew. They just didn't want to say it. It was already there. The words didn't echo. They settled. Across the chamber, ancient species, beings that had survived extinction cycles, that had evolved beyond fear, beyond instinct. Shifted. Not physically. Internally. Because something old had just been awakened. Not within the human. Within them. A memory. Of predators. Of things that did not warn. Did not hesitate. Did not miss. We misclassified them, a voice said. No one argued. We assumed emotional instability equated to weakness. Another pause. But what if? The sentence didn't finish immediately, because finishing it meant accepting it. What if those emotions were never the problem? Silence. What if they were the restraint that landed harder than anything before it, because it flipped everything, every assumption, every report, every conclusion the council had ever made about humanity, turned inside out. They weren't unpredictable, someone whispered. They were controlled. And when that control is no longer necessary, another voice added, no one finished that thought. They didn't need to. At the center of the chamber, one of the inner council finally moved. A slow shift forward. Measured. Deliberate. Display the human. The chamber lights adjusted. All attention turned to the one figure who had not spoken, not reacted, not moved. The human. Still seated. Still calm. Watching. Not the council. Not the chamber. But something else. Something internal. They've returned to baseline, a delegate noted, scanning. Heart rate stable. No elevated markers. As if nothing occurred, another said. A long silence followed. That's not baseline. The voice came from the inner council. Certain. That is control. Across the chamber, no one disagreed, because they had all seen what lay beneath it. And now, they understood the truth. Not completely, but enough. Humanity had never been harmless. They had simply been choosing not to be dangerous. Until now, no one spoke at first, because the answer was already forming, slowly, reluctantly, across dozens of minds that had just witnessed something they could not unsee. We need context. The statement came from a senior analyst cast, measured, controlled, clinging to structure. Behavior without origin is meaningless. If this is inherent, then it must have a source. Yes, another agreed quickly. Biology. Evolutionary pressure. Environmental conditioning. Something explains this. All eyes turned, subtly, carefully, toward the data archives still active within the chamber. Humanities file. Previously categorized as incomplete. Display full origin data, the inner council ordered. There was a pause. Not technical. Hesitant. Full records were deemed unnecessary for initial integration. The archive system responded. Override. The command carried no force. It didn't need to. Accessing restricted evolutionary logs. The chamber dimmed again. Not for drama. For clarity. Because what appeared next demanded attention. The planet filled the projection space. Blue. Green. Beautiful. Deceptive. Designation, Earth. The archive began. Classification, Death World, confirmed. The data expanded. Violent storms. Tectonic instability. Predatory ecosystems. Disease cycles. Environmental hostility index exceeds 87% of known habitable worlds. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. That alone is not unique, a delegate noted quickly. Many species evolve under harsh conditions. Yes, the archive replied. The pause. But not like this. The projection shifted. Now, lifeforms. Predators hunting. Prey fleeing. Cycles repeating endlessly. Earth hosts an unusually high density of apex predators across multiple ecological tiers. Competition for survival is constant. Dominance is never permanent. That detail lingered, because in most systems, once a species reached the top, it stayed there. Earth. Nothing stayed. Everything fought. Everything adapted. Or it died. Humanity did not evolve alongside this system, the archive continued. They evolved within it. The projection zoomed. Early humans. Fragile. Unarmed. Physically inferior to most predators around them. No natural weapons, a delegate observed. No armor. No enhanced sensory systems. Correct. Then how did they survive? The answer came immediately. They didn't. The pause. They adapted. The images accelerated. Tools. Fire. Cooperation. Strategy. They learned to outthink what they could not overpower. They learned to endure what they could not avoid. And when necessary, the projection slowed. They learned to become what they feared. Silence spread again. Because the meaning was clear. They didn't evolve as predators, someone said. No, another replied quietly. They evolved as everything. That realization hit harder than anything before it. Because specialization had always been the rule of evolution. One strength. One path. one roll. But humans had none. They are not the fastest. No. Not the strongest. No. Not the most resilient. No. Then what are they? The answer came from the inner council. For the first time since the assembly began. With something that almost sounded like certainty. They are conditional. The chamber stilled. Explain. They do not exist in a single state, the council continued. They shift. The pause. Based on necessity. The projection changed again. Modern humans now. Laughing. Talking. Cooperating. Violence. Survival. The same species. Unrecognizable between states. They suppress what is not required, the council said. And when it becomes required. No one spoke. Because they had already seen it. They do not escalate into that state, the insectoid added quietly. The pause. They transition. That word echoed differently. Because escalation implied a climb. But transition was instant. No warning. No build-up. Just change. They carry it with them at all times, a delegate whispered. Yes. And they choose not to use it. Yes. Another silence. Heavier than all the others. Because now, the final piece had fallen into place. They weren't hiding it from us, someone said slowly. They were controlling it for themselves. No one corrected them. Because that was worse. Far worse. At the center of the chamber, the human remained still. Unchanged. Contained. But now, every species present understood something they hadn't before. Was not their natural state. It was a decision. One that could be undone. In an instant. No one rushed to speak. Not after the truth had been laid bare. The chamber remained still, locked in a silence that no protocol had prepared for. Because this was no longer a discussion. It was a recalibration. Of understanding. Of hierarchy. A risk. They must be reclassified. The statement came carefully. Deliberately. Not as a suggestion. As a necessity. Across the chamber, no objections followed. No counterarguments. No hesitation. Because classification was how the council defined reality. And reality had just changed. Designation, another voice asked. A pause followed. Longer than any before it. Because for the first time in recorded history, there was no existing category that fit. They are not a threat in a constant state, a delegate began. But they are capable of becoming one without warning. Then they are unstable, another offered. No. The correction came instantly. They are controlled. Silence returned. Because that distinction mattered. Instability could be predicted. Contained. Managed. Controlled. Could be removed. Then what do we call them? Someone asked quietly. No one answered immediately. The inner council spoke. They are a conditional apex species. The words settled into the chamber like a verdict. Not debated. Not challenged. Accepted. Because nothing else came close. A species that was not always dominant, but could become dominant. At will. That implies they choose when to be dangerous, a delegate said. Yes. And when not to be. Another pause. He gave them a chance. That detail resurfaced unexpectedly. The single word. So, he issued a warning before engaging. Which means, the thought hung in the air. This outcome was avoidable. That realization changed everything again. Because it meant the human had not acted out of instinct alone. But judgment. Measured. Decided. Final. They did not lose control, the insectoid said softly. They enforced it. No one argued. Because they had all seen the same thing. The absence of rage. The absence of chaos. The presence of something far more precise. At the center of the chamber, the human finally moved. A small motion. They stood. Every eye followed. Every sensor locked. Every instinct sharpened. But nothing happened. No shift. No tension. No threat. Just a simple movement. The human adjusted their position and turned slightly toward the council. For a moment, silence stretched. They spoke. Not loudly. Not forcefully. The the same way they had before. It's over. That was all. No explanation. No justification. No apology. Just certainty. And somehow, that was enough. Because no one questioned it. No one challenged it. No one even considered responding. The human turned and began to walk the same way they had in the recording. Unremarkable. Measured. Normal. The chamber watched them go. Not with curiosity. Not with confusion. But with something new. Something that had not existed before this moment. Understanding. And beneath it, respect. The kind earned not through power alone, but through restraint. Because now they knew the truth. Not just what humans could do, but what they chose not to do. Long after the human had left the chamber, no one moved. No one spoke. One of the oldest members of the council broke the silence. A voice that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, that had seen weapons capable of erasing stars, spoke a single line. Ensure. The pause. We are never the reason they choose otherwise. And across the Galactic Council, no one disagreed.